Baltimore's leadership over the past 25 years has been, well, shaky to say the least. So today we're going to take a look at the best, or rather the least bad mayors of the past 25 years. I thought this was particularly appropriate given that former mayor Shelia Dixon just recently announced that she was going to be running for office against Brandon Scott in the next election. So without further ado, here's the list. At number one, you know the list is bad when the best ranked mayor had her term ended early following her resignation. Putting aside fraudulent misappropriation of funds and those types of things, Shelia Dixon actually had a fairly successful time in office. In a city that lost half its population over the past 5 decades, Shelia Dixon actually saw a small amount of population growth during her time in office. Additionally, she presided over the most significant drop in crime in the city's recent history. When she entered office, the city was averaging close to 275 murders per year, but by the time she left, that number was down to around 200, representing a decline of about 25%. The year after she left office was actually the lowest murder rate in recent history, a number that unfortunately has nearly doubled since she left office. She had an unceremonious exit from office following an incident where she was accused of taking gift cards intended for a children's hospital, but that aside, the city actually did reasonably well under her watch. At second best, we have Brandon Scott. He's the current mayor of the city and has had mixed reviews so far. At times, he appears to be over his head, which is apparent by his propensity to get frustrated during interviews when asked even basic questions, and he's also notorious for inconsistent messaging. At one point, he was a proponent of defunding the police, but he's changed his tune significantly since becoming mayor. He was only 36 when he was elected and had extremely limited work experience doing anything other than being a Baltimore City politician, so this inexperience should be expected. And in fairness to Brandon Scott, he seems to be learning to articulate his messages more clearly the longer he's been in office. As far as the city under his watch, the trend of significant population decline that started in 2015 has continued with no signs of slowing down. But on the bright side, in 2023, so far there has been a small downtick in violent crime. At third best, we have Martin O Malley. To be honest, very little positive happened in the city under his watch, but for some reason, he often gets credit for being a good mayor. Since most objective metrics show that the city was worse off when he left office than when he took office, I guess we can at least give him credit for having a good PR team. But when it comes to the well-being of Baltimore City, there isn't much good to say about Martin O Malley's time in office. He did have a substantial drop in violent crime in his very first year in office, but by the time he left, the murder rate had risen back to almost the level it was when he started. Population loss wasn't any better, as the city lost nearly 50,000 residents while O'Malley was in office. Now we're down to the fourth best, aka the second worst. Stephanie Rawlings-Blake. She was a hard one to rank because she had some really positive things go on while she was in office, and she also had some really negative things go on in office. Stephanie Rawlings-Blake has the distinct honor of being the only mayor in the past several decades to actually see population growth for several years in a row. It wasn't substantial in terms of numbers, but just the very fact that the city was gaining population several years in a row was notable. Also, the city had fewer than 200 murders in 2011, her first year in office, which is something that hadn't happened for decades and unfortunately has not happened in the decades since. So with all these positives, how is she the second worst? And that would be because she oversaw what was arguably the worst week in Baltimore history, or at least recent memory. Following the death of Freddie Gray in 2015, riots broke out, widespread looting and arsons took place across the city, and meanwhile, Stephanie Rawlings-Blake had this to say. The riots were bad, but the aftermath was even worse. Starting a month after the riots and continuing to the present day, the crime rate spiked to a level never seen in Baltimore's history. Additionally, that positive trend of population growth did a 180, and the city has been shrinking ever since. Orioles game attendance has tanked, and the Inner Harbor, once the crown jewel of Baltimore, went downhill virtually overnight. There was a mass exodus of police officers leaving, which led to a chronically understaffed department and notoriously bad response times. One could go on and on about all the negative effects that giving them the space to destroy had on the city, but for now I'll wrap it up and just say that she had some good things going, and then it all went to crap when the riots happened. And unfortunately, her leadership during that time was not what was needed. Okay, one more to go before we wrap this up with the worst mayor. And I'm going to do an honorable mention and give a shout out to Jack Young. He took over after the number one worst mayor was removed from office. He wasn't really in office long enough to do much, but he didn't really do a spectacular job. And the crime and population loss issues were not improved under his watch. But that leads us to the worst mayor in recent history, his predecessor, Catherine Pugh. She got elected not too long after the 2015 riots. All the bad things that happened under the riots continued and in some cases got worse under her watch. Population loss accelerated and crime remained at historically high levels. Her most notable claim to fame, however, was how her term ended, and it didn't end well. Following a self-dealing scandal, she was charged with 11 counts of various criminal activities. She pled guilty to 4 of them and ended up with a 3-year sentence in federal prison. Additionally, she had close to $1 million in penalties, fines, and assets seized. So there you have it. Recent Baltimore mayors ranked from best to worst. Where do you stand on all this? Were my rankings fair, or did I miss the mark?